And so we move to our final paper of this session, which will be presented remotely by Antonela Tommasel, and the paper is entitled "I Want to Break Free, Recommending Friends from Outside the Echo Chambers." Okay.
Hi, everyone. Do you hear me well?
Hello? Antonella, we
Hello.
hear you perfectly. Whenever you're ready, you can start.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. So, hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. I'm Antonella, and I'll be telling you a little bit about our paper. Nowadays, we almost live and breathe social media. We can access and share information, and more importantly, we can interact with others. In recent years, social media has also fostered the propagation of different forms of misinformation and even abusive behaviors. These phenomena have also been associated with an increased politics, science, and even healthcare polarization, which has led to the emergence of echo chambers that we have already here. Echo chambers refer to situations in which people only interact with others expressing their same point of view, which can lead to selective exposure, bias assimilation, and even more polarization. In this context, recommenders play an important role as mediators of information propagation and can unintendedly amplify the phenomenon. Often, this situation stems from the concepts on which recommenders are based on, for example, homophily, which could amplify biases and reinforce echo chambers. Then, it is necessary to harness recommenders with mechanisms that could help mitigate the negative effects of this unwanted phenomena and thus increase the user-perceived quality of recommenders. So, what do we propose? We tackle the firm recommendation problem to foster a diversity of recommendations in an echo chamber setting. We rely on the implicit modeling of echo chambers, both existing and new, to present users with recommendations from outside such chambers. A fundamental challenge for this problem is how to learn these dynamic user and echo chamber representations. Here, implicit modeling implies that we don't explicitly discover networks communities, as knowing them introduces constraints such as defining in advance the criteria to find them and might also be computationally complex. To this end, we present FREDGE, a firm recommender for breaking echo chambers. It takes as input a social network, and for each user, it ranks recommendations according to an estimated relationship strength. FREDGE couples echo chamber awareness and user representations to balance the relevance, diversity, and novelty of friends' recommendations. It is inspired by the graph convolutional network and a deep and wide architecture, in which the deep part can better generalize over the unseen interactions, while the wide part can better lend implicit characteristics of users, facilitating the training process. And well, how FREDGE works? It starts by taking as input the conversational interaction network. This means that we don't focus on the topological follower interactions, but on the content-based interactions, derived from the reply to, retweet, and mention relations. In this sense, relations are directed and weighted based on the number of interactions. For example, the times a user mentions another. Additional weight alternatives could be considered based on the number of reactions that conversations receive or even their length. Users are then represented by two things. First, trainable embedding of their intrinsic characteristics, and second, BERT embeddings for the last 15 shared tweets. Tweets were represented by their average pool embeddings and no fine-tuning was performed. Then we define three parallel graph convolutional networks to learn users' latent characteristics. Each GCN allows learning the specific weight of a particular interaction type regarding the complete set of users' interactions. Then the outputs of the three GCNs are concatenated to generate an intermediate user representation based on the combined interactions. We are using GCNs not only to represent the target user, but also the recommendees. GCNs allow represented nodes in a graph based on their characteristics and those of the adjacent ones. For the target users, this includes the characteristics of the interactions, while for the potential recommendees, this includes characteristics related to how other users interact with them. The two generated representations are then concatenated and passed through two dense layers. Despite the networks are architecturally the same, they are not Siamese as weights are not shared between them. Finally, the resulting embeddings of the target user and the potential recommendees are concatenated and passed through a dense layer with one unit. And the output of this layer is added to the output originating the GCNs and the two dense layers. Finally, for each user, FREDGE ranks recommendations in descending order based on their estimated strength. This strength acts as proxies of how likely users are to interact in the future. The higher the strength, the better the balance between user relevance and distance between echo chambers, and the higher the likelihood of users interacting in the future. Even though FREDGE considers different interactions, it combines them into unique strength value, which are asymmetric to account for Twitter's asymmetric nature. Due to hardware limitations, it is unfeasible to estimate all interaction strength simultaneously, as it requires a large amount of memory. Those estimations are calculated for a user pair at a time. As we want recommendations to balance relevance and diversity, we needed interactions between users in different chambers to carry a higher weight than interactions between users in the same chamber. With this, we also aim at implicitly learning chamber structure, which allows for more freedom in their definition and more sensitivity to network changes. In this sense, we define a loss function based on the distance between users and the number of interactions. The logarithm here reduces the influence of users with many interactions, and the scalar prevents interaction with a weight of 1 to become 0. Beta allows tuning the preference of whether to receive closer and more accurate recommendations or further and more diverse recommendations. User distance is based on cosine similarity computed over a new 10-dimensional embedding. These embeddings were trained separately from the main model. The intuition here is that users with similar interaction patterns will be represented by similar embeddings. More details on the defined functions and implementations can be found in the paper. To evaluate FREH, we defined 2 research questions. First, how does FREH compare with other approaches in the literature? Second, how each component contributes to FREH performance. Due to time constraints, we will be only focusing on the first research question. Evaluation was based on the Obamacare collection, including tweets related to the Obamacare and ACA hashtag. Using the FakeInit tool, we collected about 8 million tweets belonging to over 8,000 users. For the purpose of evaluation, we only kept those users in the largest connected component to guarantee that they could be both source and target of interactions. We ended up selecting over 6,000 users. Based on the interactions networks and the pre-computed polarity, we were able to verify the existence of echo chambers in the data. We compared FREH with 11 different baselines. We considered 4 trivial, non-personalized, and traditional recommenders. Then we adapted several traditional and state-of-the-art item recommenders to the friend recommendation task. And finally, we also considered 2 works implemented re-ranking techniques to foster recommendation diversity and mitigate filter balance. Recommendations were evaluated not only in terms of their accuracy, but also on their impact in network shape and evolution. In terms of relevance, we chose 3 classic metrics: precision, recall, and NDCG. For diversity novelty, we chose variations of intra-list dissimilarities that were assessed considering both individual users and the communities they form. This allows studying the fairness of recommendations across the structure's user form. The similarities were computed using the Euclidean distance of either structural or content-based vectors. All the evaluations were performed over the same data partitions and considering the top 10 recommendations, as over half of the users had 10 or more interactions in the test set. Here we have the results. Random recommender achieved low relevance but high diversity and novelty results as expected. Differences were up to 400% in terms of recall. Results also show a trade-off between relevance and diversity novelty, as techniques achieving high relevance also achieve low diversity and novelty. Statistically significant differences were observed for all techniques but FREH and GraphRec. Topological baselines also achieve high precision and low diversity, which is expected as recommendations are purely based on user neighborhood. FREH achieved significantly better diversity and novelty results. Regarding content, considering the full tweet set achieved the highest diversity novelty results, while only using the last 15 increased the relevance. This could be related to the broad period covered by the dataset in which topics could have shifts. The best results for the adapted item recommendation techniques were achieved by GraphRec. GraphRec even outperformed FREH for 1 diversity metric. Nonetheless, most differences favoring FREH were statistically significant. NDCG showed that despite lower precision and recall, FREH still ranked high the relevant users. The re-ranking techniques achieved higher relevance than GraphRec and FREH, but lower diversity and novelty. In this case, the achieved diversity and novelty did not significantly improve the characteristics of the original network. In average, FREH improved baselines up to 47% in terms of diversity and novelty. In general, novelty was higher than diversity, implying that even when recommendations included similar users, they were still different from the already known ones, thus expanding users' neighborhood. As a highlight, novelty was higher for the structural distance, implying that the recommended users belonged to the other communities, but they still share similar content, which is expected given the topic-focused nature of data. Similar novelty results were observed when considering a community division based on user link. Based on these results, we can conclude that phrase satisfactorily increases diversity and novelty by recommending users from outside the chamber of influence, thus fostering the openness of users and their chambers. In summary, we presented Frage, an echo chamber aware recommender aiming at making relevant, novel, and diverse friend recommendations. Frage achieves similar relevant results to baselines while increasing the diversity and novelty, thus effectively helping to reduce the echo chamber effect. We're also able to verify the contribution of each component. Finally, data and implementations are publicly available in a GitHub repo. As future work, we expect to consider other datasets in other domains to truly assess the usefulness of Frage, to continue to explore the particularities of each interaction type, dimensions, replies, and retweets, to know how they contribute to recommendations and perform a qualitative study. So, thanks for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for the talk. And we have a question online, and it's coming from Shiri. And the question is, thank you for the great talk. How can you tell if the recommendations will be accepted by the hypothetical users?
Okay, in this case, we divide all the data we had into training and test, and we consider a recommendation to be accepted if we could find it in the test set.
Okay.
For all the diversity and novelty computations, we assume that all recommendations were accepted to be able to discover how the network would be changed by those recommendations.
Okay, we have another question that is asking, different platforms have varying levels of polarization. How can we address and if this will actually scale, if we can address for different levels of polarizations in different platforms?
We don't actually assess the degree of polarization in our network. I mean, we verify the existence of echo chambers, we verify the level of polarization, but we didn't include the level of polarization inside the approach. We gathered that that could be actually analyzed if implicitly analyzed when we aim at implicitly discover the echo chambers. I mean, we rely on the interactions and the degree of interaction between users, and that could be a manifestation of the polarization. Regarding scalability, it could be a problem to escalate the proposed technique if we have users with many interactions. For example, if we gather a data set including users such as famous people or politicians, that could be introduced a performance burden in our technique.
Okay, we have one final question coming from Tiago Cabo. And the question is, do you think it is possible to show diverse content intended as more diverse without affecting the user experience in the platform, for example, by measuring the CTR or the session time?
I think that there should be more experimentation on that, because we have seen another works that have actually studied that showing more diverse content can be counterproductive. So we really need to think about the mitigation strategies and how to deploy them to the final user.
Okay. I will ask you one final question. In your conclusions, you mentioned the explainability of your approach as a future direction in which you want to go. And I was wondering if you already thought how explaining an echo chamber-free type of recommendation would be perceived by the user. Do you think that it would be understandable, easy to pass as a message to the users, and if you have any thoughts in this direction?
We really hope it would be easier for the user to understand the explanations. We haven't really started working in that direction or even doing some user studies to test that assumptions.
Okay, so let's thank our speaker again. As usual, I invite you to go to the app, to the page of this paper, to ask more questions and to interact with the authors. So This paper concludes our first session. Now we have a coffee break which will last for 30 minutes. And for those of you who are online, there are also posters and demos for you to enjoy. Enjoy your break. See you later.